Hello and welcome to Winkworth's head office, where we're here to discuss the Renters' Rights Bill 2025. There's lots to discuss and to discover for landlords, letting agents and tenants, and I've got a fantastic panel of experts to take us through all the finer points. I'm Melissa York, I'm the Assistant Property Editor of The Times and The Sunday Times. Here with me, man who needs no introduction in Winkworth, is the CEO of Winkworth, so it's Dominic Agace.
Thank you, Melissa.
And I've also got Jemma here with me. She's the Associate Director at the Greenwich and Blackheath Winkworth franchise, and she's been working in letting agency for about 17 years, so she can tell us what's happening on the ground.
Thank you.
And I've also got Sam Mayer. He works as a solicitor for Henriques Griffiths LLP, so he'll be able to take us through the finer points of the legislation and how it will work in practice.
Thank you.
Just big picture outline stuff. So obviously there are a lot of changes coming in at one time in this bill. So Dominic, I don't know if you could tell us what you think the biggest key changes are that people need to know about.
Yeah, as you say, there's a significant change to the sector, which had really sort of started in the 1990s with the introduction of short tenancy. The big changes drawn the headlines, which all colleagues go into more detail, are the ending of no-fault evictions. This was Section 21 that relying on the courts to get access to your property to a new tenant, as well as legislation around bidding up on properties, increased standards, property extending regulation in the social sector to the private rental sector, and much many other things that are sort of progressing as the bill is progressing and are evolving. So it's a significant change for those who may bought property in the land.
Yes, and why do you think it's happening now? Because it started off as the Renters Reform Bill with the Conservative Party. It's been beefed up by the Labour Party and rebranded to be the Renters' Rights Bill. But why do you think this is happening in particular now? Do you think it's more to do with the growth of the private rented sector, or do you think it's more to do with politics and future demographics?
It's such a lent-on sector. So many people depend on it. It's, social housing hasn't been social housing bills over the last decades to keep up with demand. The house prices have grown to a level where affordability is a challenge for those, particularly getting a deposit to buy their first flat. And so, there's a much larger proportion of the population that are reliant into the sector, and therefore, it's important. Governments have to get it right in order to be elected. So I think that's why you've seen it as a cross-party issue between Conservatives and Labour.
Yeah, one of those things is security of tenure, right? Because if you're getting people renting into their 30s and 40s, for example, when they might be having children, they've got children in the local schools, they need a bit more security of tenure. And this is one of the main reasons cited for getting rid of Section 21 no-fault evictions, because, in case people don't know, you've got a Section 8 mandatory eviction if you can prove more than 8 weeks' worth of arrears. You've got discretionary grounds where you can go to the court and talk about antisocial behaviour or anything else you want to talk about. Section 21 was a very easy way. If you wanted to reoccupy your property or put it on the market, you could just serve the notice and then you've got 2 months' notice and then the property is yours again. You don't have to give a reason, which is why it was called no-fault evictions. So, Jemma, could we go to you and talk about whether getting rid of those evictions is actually going to change the dynamic between landlord and tenant? Is the landlord going to feel as though they haven't got as much control of their property, do you think? Or do you think it's actually going to be great for tenants? They will feel more secure in their home and stay for a bit longer.
Do you think tenants are going to feel more secure about it? Because there's been a lot of bad press about Section 21s. In my experience, in reality, landlords very rarely serve a Section 21 notice unless they want to move back in or sell their property. And the landlords, they should still be reassured that they can still do this, but it'll just be under Section 8. I don't think it will massively change the dynamic of the relationship, and it will give tenants reassurance that only, I would say, slight difference with that is that some tenants actually like the reassurance of having a new renewal contract for a fixed term, because they also know that they will be protected in Year 2 and 3 and 4, possibly from the landlord not selling, whereas that's obviously been taken away. So while it's great they can leave whenever they want, only live 2 years later, so there's obviously that flip side of it, that some of people will miss the safety of having a fixed term from the tenant side as well.
Yeah. And so for landlords that are watching, they might think, well, how do I evict under Section 8, does that mean I'm going to have to go to court if I want to sell my property? So I don't know, Sam, whether you could fill us in. Exactly what would the mechanism be under the new bill for repossessing your property?
Well, the short answer to that is yes, essentially. You will have to go to court. One of the impacts of the abolition of the Section 21 notice is that with that goes the accelerated procedure under that notice. So there was a fast track, no hearing route that you could get a possession order just on that no fault ground under Section 21. That's now gone. Potentially it was a missed opportunity to build in some of the no fault Section 8, expanded Section 8 notices into a similar accelerated process. That hasn't been done. So your only option is to go to court, and you will require a hearing, you will require evidence, you will need to meet the grounds, persuade a judge, and if it's a mandatory ground, then your order will be made. If it's discretionary, then of course there's a discretion as the judge will only make an order if he or she feels that it's reasonable to do so. So it is going to put a lot of weight on the court system, which is already somewhat overstretched, and that's one of the problems that the previous government saw, and one of the things that held up that previous bill. But the current government is pressing ahead with it, so we'll see what happens with that.
I mean, it has been. I might be wrong here. I think it's been 4 years in the making, possibly. That we've been talking
2019.
2019
was when it was first tabled.
I mean, even longer than that. We've been talking about getting rid of Section 21. So, what are the kind of mitigating measures that are going to be put in? Do you think it will be phased in over a period of time, or do you think it will go overnight? Because I imagine you might have landlords using Section 21 while they can, because they think maybe in a few months' time I might have to go to court. So they're trying to avoid that cliff edge by by doing it overnight.
Do you mean by transitional implementation of the new law?
Do you think it will be it will be kind of a phase where it's kind of integrated over a number of months, or do you think it will just be overnight? Section 21s are now gone.
So the bill will receive royal assent, and then there will be a delay period where it will come into effect. So that might be months. The government have said they will give plenty of notice, so it might be early 2026. The assent might happen in September, October of 2025. So there will be that sort of warning, as it were. When it does come in, whatever the date is that it comes in, it will be a cliff edge. So shutters will come down. All assured short hold tenancies will cease to exist, and they will be assured tenancies. There are some exceptions to that. So, for example, if you've served a Section 21 notice, you'll have 3 months to use it, which isn't too dissimilar from the actual limitation period on using the notice now, if you were to serve it now. There are other sort of transitional effects of, for example, rent review. Some of the rent in advance that will be preserved for pre-commencement tenancies. But essentially, and the best way for landlords and agents to view this is that it will be a very sudden, short, sharp shock. It will come in, and you'll need to hit the ground running and be prepared to deal with assured tenancies from the date of implementation.
Mm-hmm. And I believe the government is putting in some kind of extra funding to make sure that courts will be able to handle this. Are they doing anything else to kind of beef up the courts or prepare them in any way?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's those sort of practical issues are perhaps beyond my ken.
So the Renters' Rights Bill has been quite controversial, as was the Renters' Reform Bill before it, because lots of people would say that landlords are just going to flee the market, they'll exit the market, they won't want to put up with all this extra regulation, they can't get hold of their properties when they want to. Why would anyone be a private landlord in those sort of circumstances? So I don't know. I mean, Dominic, I don't know if you could kick us off.
Yeah.
In terms of landlords leaving the market, do you think that has been exaggerated, or do you think actually there's a bit of truth in it?
No, definite truth. I mean, I think just recent research was like 5 landlords are selling to everyone buying at the moment. So there is a big effect going on now as this legislation comes. And it's far bigger than that, because not only is existing ones selling, but it's kind of the signal to future ones. So
they play a really important role in the property market. You know, all these developments and houses that we want to be built, you know, need someone to buy them. They need to be the flats to be bought and anchored by a buying population, and that traditionally was the buy-to-let investor. So if they're no longer buying, then the building projects don't work. Therefore, you don't get the houses delivered that the government wants. So there are some significant problems going on at the moment because of this legislation.
But I suppose, you know, it is a very vastly kind of rapidly changing market. We've got build-to-rent operators coming in. You know, that's obviously a new thing that's being imported from the States and elsewhere. And lots of investment going in there. You've also got international investors. I certainly still see London as a very safe place to invest in, and the UK in
Well,
general.
do they now? I mean, this is the trouble, isn't it? With the stamp duty, recent stamp duty hiking of 3 for a second property, 2 for if you're a foreigner buying property. You know, those developments that need the affordable housing percentage to be built are paid for by the premiums that the overseas investor were paying in London. And it is very different geographically, but this is most acute as a problem in London, right? Because this is where, you know, prices are highest. It doesn't stack up as well because interest rates gone up, so your debt costs more, so the margins are lower. The buy-to-let investor is most under pressure in London, I think, by this legislation.
Yeah, sure. And also, Jemma, I don't know whether you could speak to what landlords on the ground are most worried about. Is it the Section 21s, or, you know, what, when they're talking to you and saying, oh, I'm not sure about that, what are the things that they're bringing up?
I think they're quite nervous. I think obviously because a lot of them may have used Section 21 in the past, obviously reading the headlines. And, you know, I do think there's a little bit of scaremongering about Section 21s and using the word eviction, you know, end of tenancy. You know, I think eviction is actually quite a harsh word, especially when you've not actually done anything wrong. So we are trying to educate our clients, to be quite honest, and say, you know, don't panic. You know, you still will be able to recover your property. You know, it's very rare that a landlord, you know, just generally, most landlords have got good tenants, don't want their tenancies to end. You know, they really are quite happy. Most tenants just want to live there in peace, you know, enjoy their time at the property. The only landlords I think we've really seen exit in the market were the accidental landlords, you know, that can't sell, so then have had to rent. But those sort of ones, and, you know, I think most of our landlords that would be leaving have probably already exited in 23 and 24, to be quite honest.
Yeah, this is it. So, I mean, in that sense, it seems as though there's a certain type of landlord, perhaps one that invested in the early 90s in the big kind of buy-to-let boom, that are now approaching retirement and they're kind of cashing in almost. And this is all this extra regulation might be a bit too much work for them. Is that the kind of thing that you're seeing?
A lot of people think, oh, I can't be bothered with it, to be honest, because they're just a bit intimidated by the fact there's so many changes. I mean, to be honest, once we speak to them, we do calm them down. So we haven't had too many, but obviously there are going to be some that, you know, want to make things, you know, a bit easier going forward. Maybe if they obviously are getting older and want to make their estate easier for, you know.
I think there'll be less. There will definitely be a smaller sector as a result of this. I mean, that's, you know, this is a part of a succession of different measures that have kind of got us to this place. So it's not, it's all driven. Commercial property obviously has very different rules in investment to residential property, and lots of people choose commercial property to invest in with the rights of the tenants that has, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an professional investment. But clearly, it just chips away at the numbers that this appeals to. So, you know, the other tax changes that have led the way have had a bigger impact. Perhaps on
financial impact has been a lot for people. So, you know, with the mortgage rates, sometimes we've had a very small yield. You know, it's just getting to the point that it's untenable for the landlord to do it. Obviously, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we have seen huge rent increases. So, we don't personally have RPI rent increases written into our contracts. We've always done the market rents, so that's not a concern for our landlords because we always try and achieve the market rents, but, you know, annually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's not, you know, ultimately the number of landlords is the thing that drives standards. You know, to try and regulate your way through competition is an interesting challenge. Ultimately, if you have more landlords, there is competition with tenants. And before, you know, I remember the 2014, 15, before these regulations started changing. So that 15-year period, rents in London went nowhere because there were lots of buy-to-let investors and people were using it as a way of investing for their future. And so there's lots of choice. So people, you know, didn't move rents up because they wanted to attract tenants. So since we brought in regulation, ironically, we've seen prices move up more. and stretch those affordability measures that perhaps weren't being stretched beforehand.
I think it's like an unintended consequence of the government trying to regulate and improve, life for tenants. But unfortunately, it has driven up the rents, and also we've lost a lot of stock for people hoping to maximise their investment at Airbnbs, especially I'd say more so in central London.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, to kind of take a national picture of it, in London, obviously house prices are extremely high. So unless you bought a couple of decades ago, or even 3 decades ago, your entry point to invest in a London property is incredibly high. You've got your mortgage interest rate relief that went in 2015, 2016. And mortgage rates going up, that really kind of impacts your yield if you're a London landlord, because most of the time you'll have to be mortgaged to afford that property. So are you seeing more landlords selling up and telling you that they're going to cheaper parts of the country because they'll get better yields there? Is that something you're seeing?
I think it's definitely a regional mix. London, as you say, is the most hurt by this because it requires more debt than the average investor. Whereas, it is a great investment if you have less debt or you have no debt. We've seen the tumultuous nature of the stock market sometimes under the Liberation Day tariffs and all these things. But in the end of the day, a company may cut its dividend, but a tenant, needs someone to live. And so if you're investing for your retirement and you can have a property where a tenant pays you rent and you're, reasonable landlord, it's a fantastic investment. But in the old days, it was available with 75% debt. And now that's probably somewhere below 50% and sort of reducing. So it's just not as available to as many people. And that combined with, this sort of sell-off, I suppose, of those that aren't used to dealing with regulation, who may be very good landlords, to be honest, they're just not prepared to accept new regulation, means that it's a bit of a tricky situation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, I do think there is an affordability limit. Rents can't go up beyond affordability. And clearly this legislation targets rent increases and there's mechanisms for tenants there. But it's also about quality, and accessibility. So if there just aren't places to live in London for young professionals coming here that are in fun parts of London or are decent, they're just not going to come to London, and that's a big problem for the vitality of us, the city, really. So it's got social problems. The other thing you see is people, if they can't find a place because they just aren't there, the competition is too high, and it's not a rent thing, they just can't get access to it because someone rent it quicker than them. People living at home longer, all sorts of social, economic issues in play.
This is it. I mean, this is why supply matters, right? Because it affects rents. And so one of the things that you were talking about before was that you thought that a lot of landlords that were going to sell up probably have already done so, in the last couple of years. And also we've seen rents almost peak. I mean, they're stabilising now, right?
I definitely think they've plateaued a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As I said, it's always tracked wage inflation, really. And that is, it can't break that because it's not the new money coming. It's not like a sort of sales market where you have sort of wealthy people putting their safety deposit box by buying their flat in Knightsbridge. It is driven by local affordability and wage inflation. So it has to lie with that. But that's not a question of, that still doesn't get around the availability problem, I suppose.
And also, just to bring you in, Sam, in terms of the legislation, it's saying that it's going to ban rental bidding. And obviously that means, getting people together, and when you've got
a couple of years ago, I was literally picking the phone up and I was saying, I will offer over the asking price. We've not even seen it yet. I was like, I don't care. My landlord's putting the rent up by £1,000. I just need somewhere. It was crazy. We would literally say, we'd make a property live. I think it's in 2023, and we'd be like, how many seconds do we get our first inquiry? Because people are desperate.
Yeah, that's it. And I suppose taking bids above the asking rent is obviously great for the landlord. But it is causing quite a desperate situation. It's pushing tenants to the limits of their affordability, right?
I literally felt sorry for them. You could hear their desperation on the...
Especially in London, I regularly meet people that are paying 50% of their take-home monthly income on rent.
It's risen so much, I think, in the last few years.
Do you think that's a good thing that they're stopping that? So now you have to rent it for the asking rent. Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think it's going to have kind of unintended consequences in the market?
I think landlords want a stable, progressive, income that keeps up with the progressing costs in their investment. There is inflation in the costs of buildings, etc., to keep maintaining them, and inflationary rent increases, which were sort of what there was before in the sort of 2000s and up to the sort of 2015, is what sort of keeps everyone happy. It sort of needs to go forward, but at a very gentle rate that's affordable. So yes, I think landlords would be happy at that basis. The sort of extreme movements of the last few years, but they were slightly driven by you saw rents go down 20% in London as well, because everyone's going to the country, and then they went back up 20%.
Canary Wharf, they had, some of the build-to-rents there were only 30% occupied. Like it's
a mass migration, basically.
Of course, people will come back now. So
yeah, and sort of normalising. So I think that is the thing. But what's happened, I think why rents now have stabilised and come off that peak is because people are workarounds. People aren't living in the cities; they're living further out and commuting in further distances. Or the younger generation, in the 20s, are staying at home as long as possible, right, to avoid that the rental accommodation. So I think these are the challenges.
Yeah, and another thing as well is setting up that tribunal as well for tenants to challenge rent increases. And as I understand it, am I right in saying that they'll have 2 months to do that? So they'll have 2 months' notice before the rent goes up, and then they'll have those 2 months to challenge at tribunal, and it will be a free service. I mean, how do you see that working, especially with all the pressures that are on the courts at the moment? I know it'll be dealt in a different way, but I mean, how do you see that playing out, Sam?
Yeah, so to clarify, the process is correct. As you've said, it's a Section 13 notice, which is notice of the proposed rent review. Can't be more than the market rent. We've been talking a little bit about the markets and how that may ultimately increase, and that may be a factor that this bill actually encourages or introduces as an unintended consequence. But yeah, the process is the Section 13 notice, which we've had for a long time. So it's nothing new from that perspective, but it just limits rent review to always you must use that process. At the moment, it's essentially an optional.
Yeah, before you could have had a new contract which would make the rent increase come into effect.
Indeed, yeah, and of course there's no new fixed terms, so you don't do that anymore.
That's actually quite good because it's just a uniform one route process to increase the rent.
Yeah, and in some respects that simplifies it. As with almost everything in this Act, it lengthens the notice periods, obviously to the detriment, you might say, of the landlord. And yes, then the tenant has that notice period of 2 months to apply to the tribunal to get the tribunal's rubber stamp, essentially, as to whether it thinks that is a fair increase, whether it is higher than the market rent, and it can only reduce it. The tribunal cannot impose a rent that's higher than the notice proposed in the landlord's notice.
Yes, whereas currently it can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also it can backdate the rent increase from the date in the notice. And when the bill comes in, it won't be able to do that.
I mean, that will empower a lot more tenants to challenge rent increases because they've almost got nothing to lose.
Exactly.
Before they could have come back with an even higher rent.
Yeah. And also the real benefit to the tenant is it can delay that rent increase by potentially many months.
Yeah.
Coming back to your point about the tribunal and the burden on that system, the tribunal system, in my experience at the moment, is relatively efficient, probably in comparison to the county court system, but it's going to be swamped potentially, and that could create huge delays, which I think is why there's been a mechanism built into this bill to give the government the opportunity to amend these rent review aspects, and for example the date of when the increase can be brought in and things of that nature. So we'll have to see how it unfolds, how it beds in, but yeah, it could result in a tribunal system that is absolutely swamped.
Okay, because if the general tenant population are aware of this, obviously, like you say, why would you not?
Yeah.
Why would you not? It stops the rent going up. But from experience, most tenants don't seem to know too much about the Renters' Rights Bill. So, in turn, they probably aren't aware about this. But in practice, like this time next year, it'll be really interesting to know the stats of how many people who've tried to increase the rent, how many have actually gone, Joe, what? No, I don't agree with this. And, kick that mechanism.
The thing is also, what's can be forgotten in this legislation is it's all really been about relationships in the majority of cases.
Yeah.
Good tenants and good landlords get on and they work to make a home that's suitable for a long term to live in, and they already have long tenancies in place currently. What this is really aiming at is the dastardly few that let everyone down, and so it's focusing on that. And I suppose some of the worries then you look at it is implementation, and how do we enforce this? We've seen recent headlines around HMOs and investigations driven into how many are not even known about by councils. So do those dastardly few that are in the private rental sector, you know, move into just go off grid and become part of the bigger problem of unknown about unregulated tenancies that, you know, take advantage of people, and that's what this is aimed at. So I think, you know, that's one of the challenges. It is also one of the reasons to remember in all of this that actually, you know, the majority, and I think you all know from experience more than I will, the majority have good relationships, and landlords are happy to maintain a property because if they like a tenant, they appreciate that and they want them for the long
We have a
term.
lot of clients that you could propose what the market rent is, and they're like, and sometimes they go, "Oh, do you know what? I really like the tenants. I don't want to put up too much." And you know, in from my opinion, you know, a good tenant is worth their weight in gold. The one that respects the property, treats it as their own. You know, you do on the whole have good relationships, like Dominic was saying, and you know, a lot of it as well is like negotiation. You know, we always speak to our tenants, you know, when there's a rent increase. Now it's Section 30, we don't just send a rent increase. But equally with Section 21s, we never just send it through the post. We always call the tenants and explain what's coming, you know, and, you know, the reason why, you know, say most of the time the landlord's moving back in or selling, you know, have a bit of human empathy, because although they don't own it, it is their home, just to explain.
That's why you need, you know, that's why you need competition and plentiful landlords, right? So that people are keen to have those relationships and work with their tenants, you know.
But also, the flip side of that is that if you've got lots of tenants to choose from, and you know, for your property, lots of competition, and you can't evict them as easily, or you can't raise the rent as easily, is that going to lead to kind of higher kind of tenant selection, essentially? Landlords really kind of being careful about who they're going to let their property to. Because one of the things that, of course, the Renters' Rights Bill is going to bring in is that you can't refuse to let your property to someone with children, or you can't refuse to let your property to someone who's on benefits, for example. And obviously, we've had the no DSS in marketing ban for a while, but this is going to strengthen that. Would it not just mean that unless you're on paper a gold star tenant, you're going to find it really hard to find a property to rent because there's so much competition?
You know, the pressure is going to be, you know, the more pressure to get that tenant absolutely right for landlord, because they're going to be concerned about how long the court systems
They're going to be
will
very
take
selective about
to
as much as they
exit,
can be within the law of who they're going to take.
Yeah.
They've been asking you as well more questions about how do you select tenants? Are you making sure you're putting people in front?
Yesterday I was speaking to someone and their references looked fine on paper, but she was really like, you know, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, asking about them and saying, no, the salary is this on the offer form. You know, they really are. Because she said, as she said, you know, once they're in the property, it's very hard, you know, to end the tenancy, and obviously she's fully aware of what's coming, you know, will make it
One of the issues is if you can't obviously pay rent up front now beyond 1 month.
Yeah.
So
I think that is going to push a lot of people into rogue landlords, because, you know, we won't be able to take those people anymore, and they'll seek, you know, landlords that possibly will be happy to take that still, because there'll still be people that will operate off grid. You know, it's the majority of landlords do comply with every new rules and regulation, but the ones, you know, there will still be the market out there that won't. And unfortunately, I think some people that we won't be able to accept, but, you know, paying rent in advance. There are a lot of people that come overseas will pay the rent in advance because they haven't got a job here yet. I'm worried, or a guarantor, I'm worried that it will be pushed to, you know, sort of like the rogue landlords that actually
were meant no way of proving that they're good for the money, essentially.
credit record or
Exactly.
So I think that's a real concern. That, you know, with what, you know, banning upfront rent payments.
Also, I mean, on a, you know, less of a sort of the overseas community is something to not forget about, is it? I mean, in central London, there's a very big overseas student community. You know, they can't pay money up front for. So how do they get, you know, how do they compete with?
And I worry the landlords, you know, without saying, well, you can't accept the rent, they're just not going to take them. You know, so the landlords themselves are exposing themselves to so much more risk by, you know, so I'm just worried then they just won't accept them. So it'll be harder for them to find accommodation.
I mean, it's interesting when you talk about overseas renters. Obviously, they could be here for their job for a few months as a corporate relocation. But, you know, we've got a lot of international students in London as well, for example. And that would obviously put more pressure on the existing student rental market, which is under a lot of pressure. I mean, the last few years, I've been on the tube and I've seen, you know, adverts for universities with guaranteed accommodation underneath it, and that was something new for me. That's a real selling point, because it's so hard for students to find accommodation these days. You know, in a way, do you think it's going to make?
Again, you know, with a London lens on, perhaps, you know, they are a big part of the London makeup, the community, and you know, the international appeal of London. So yeah, it feels like a big hurdle for them to come to London and want to choose to go to Imperial College or one of the great universities here and not somewhere else. Ideally, we want to be open, I think, to the international community and maintain London's status as a sort of international hub.
And how are periodic tenancies going to work with students as well? Because I remember when I was a student, I would always be a bit resentful about not being there over the summer, but still having to pay the rent because I was locked into a 12-month tenancy. Obviously, this won't be the case anymore. So does that mean that landlords, do you think, are going to have to turn to things like short lets, like Airbnbs, to fill those summer months? Do you see that playing out like that, or just simply not renting to students?
There is potential to that. I think landlords who want to fill that gap, but no, I don't. I think the student landlord is obviously well settled in the market, so I think that will probably stay.
I think they're bringing periodic tenancies for universities at the moment, aren't they? For students.
So obviously the tenancies that are let by the actual academic institutions themselves obviously fall outside of this change in the law. But in respect of private sector student lets, there is a specific provision about being able to serve notice within the 12-month period, as long as they've been given an indication at the start before the tenancy starts that may be used. So you can potentially start the process of eviction to get them out before the end of the academic year. Whether that will give landlords, allay landlords' fears sufficiently to make them comfortable to remain in the sector, I don't know. It may be that it's another factor that encourages private landlords to leave the student sector, which may place more sort of burden on the academic institutions themselves to provide their own or expand their own portfolios.
I mean, there's a big question here around awareness and perception as well. I know, Jemma, you did kind of touch on it, but you said you don't think that most tenants are aware of the Renters' Rights Bill coming in and how that's going to change things for them. What about landlords? Do you think lots of private landlords are paying attention, or do you think they're getting the right information about this?
We are trying to educate our landlords as much as possible. We've even changed our wording on renewal documents, ready to say, like, we suggest you go on how it stands now, statutory periodic, because of in view of how the law is going to change, to try and get as many people on that mindset already. But we do also speak to clients who are like, other agents, and they're like, I didn't know anything about this. I do think there needs to be a lot more education. So I think when it comes in, what I intend to do is when we have a landlord on the market, to send them some information, say, when you get your offer, the term will be this. So they know. So the negotiators don't have to then, well, obviously they will, but to try and give as much information at point of marketing, say the law has changed, the law is this, please be aware when you get an offer, it will be a periodic. So they know what, right from the start of marketing with us, that there's significant changes to what they may have done when they last let their property. Because, I just think a lot of people are still quite shocked. Obviously, we're industry, we're reading it all the time, but if you're not in the industry or, clicking on things that come up in your feed, I think it still will come as a bit of a shock. So we are trying our hardest to get it out there. I mean, we want to do a landlord's evening to invite people in the local community to come with one of the local solicitors in Greenwich to try and educate them as much as possible, because people are worrying about it because they don't understand it. But once they're educated, hopefully, they'll calm their fears and just, carry on with the sector, we hope.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly it's going to, the sector will continue. As I said, it is a great opportunity for someone to have, an investment for their later years, perhaps in their pension pot. It still remains that. And I think what we're just seeing is a lot of flux around this change, and it's on the back of several other things that have changed. So therefore, we're seeing a reducing sector, but it will endure, I'm sure.
And with letting agents as well, do you think you have to do extra training?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to learn in one go. I think it's all fine and we'll all be able to get our heads around it, but it's just the new normal as such. People entering the market will know no different, and it's educating the ones that are already with it. But I also think, it's going to have benefits because when the negotiation process be simple, there's no, agreeing 12 months with 6-month break clause. Everyone's going to be on the same contract. Everyone's all going to be on the same boat of what notice they need to, leave and everything like that. So there's one benefit that I think will be great, which causes an awful lot of admin, is when a tenant wants to break their contract early. And I think what we went back to earlier about the landlord and tenant relationship, the landlord's sometimes like, oh, why are they breaking early? Annoyed with the tenant. It's through no fault of their own. A lot of times, say London's a very transient international community. You get relocated with work, or relationship issues, or you need to leave. And it's like, I think it will be good now that tenants can leave after 2 months and not feel they've done something wrong by breaking their contract. And from operationally, there's an awful lot of work that's involved to go back and forth to negotiate the terms of release, and that can cause bad feeling, and you can have had a great tenancy and then ends on a bit of a sour note, which going forward, hopefully that won't happen.
It'd be interesting if it really changes the average length of tenancies after solicitation, whether that is just, they will remain as they are because that's what people want them to be.
Yeah, I think people just thought that it's and I think pets will be interesting because most people, a lot of people at the minute, it's quite hard to find somewhere with a pet. So it'll be interesting to see the rise of the pets. I mean, my favourite thing is I think pets make a house a home. Because even if you're by yourself, you go home, there's something else. There's some other living being there.
So it's very difficult. Actually. I remember for the perhaps more elderly generation who have their pets and are able to rent places with their pet, and that is their companion in life.
Yeah, it's a companion. Yeah, I mean, this might be a bit controversial, but over my years of working in the industry, I've seen more damage by children than pets. I've seen many a crayoned wall.
So have I.
I bet there's also kind of an option as well for the landlord to put some insurance in place, as I understand it, to cover any potential damage by a pet. So they could ask the tenant to pay for some sort of insurance. Is that right?
Recently changed.
So yes, that's been amended. To be honest, the insurance provisions there were problems. It was quite difficult. It was quite unworkable in some respects. So yeah, that has changed now. There's a potential 3-week rent. 3-week rent deposit, pet extension on the deposit to deal with that now. So they've sort of got rid of the insurance, and it's now an extension on the deposit, essentially specifically for the pet.
So obviously allowing a pet is now default, but you can still disallow a pet for a valid reason, as I understand it. But that seems a bit woolly to me. I mean, legally, what would be a valid reason? If you went to a tribunal, and what would they deem to be a valid reason?
Well, so for example, if it was a breach of a leasehold covenant, so if it would put the landlord in breach of a covenant under their lease, if it's a leasehold property, then that would be a clear reason not to allow a pet. I guess there may be some more practical elements to it. So, for example, if it's a Great Dane and you live on a 1-bedroom flat on the 35th floor of a block of flats, then that presents to me certain practical difficulties. There may be things, certain types of animal that, exotic creatures or snakes or things that may not be suitable for some properties. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds, but yeah, it's
something that's probably just going to be thrashed out in the tribunal, I assume.
Indeed, we'll have to see how it beds in.
Yeah.
One key thing we've had a client recently say about, they said, I'm severely allergic to dogs. So I'd want to hope that if it came to it, they could have a medical record to say that's the reason why I'm not going to permit you to have dogs, because even with professional cleaning, if someone is highly allergic, that could potentially be an issue, I would have thought, and would have been a valid ground.
Potentially so, yeah.
To get a hypoallergenic dog.
Well, exactly. One of the many cockapoos of the world.
Exactly, yeah. So, Sam, there's going to be a new ombudsman created, a private housing ombudsman. There's also going to be a private database that landlords are going to have to be registered on, that tenants can go and look themselves up on. And there's also going to be a lot of enforcement as well. So if you don't do a lot of these things, you could get huge fines, up to £7,000 fines. So could you tell us a little bit about what letting agents and landlords need to do now to make sure they're compliant with all of that?
Well, I think the main thing is to be prepared. So when the Act comes into force, they are ready to sign up for the redress scheme or the ombudsman, and get up and running with the database, because it's essentially a central government, or a centrally imposed infrastructure that's going to require some IT. It will probably be implemented last minute, over budget, probably won't work, but agents and landlords have got to be ready to jump through the hoops when they arrive. So obviously it's a compulsory scheme.
Teething problems that Be ready to be patient, I think.
Indeed, that's right. Yeah, just sit there, wait for it to go live, and then you're first in the queue or whatever. But yeah, it's just a question of reacting quickly to get on board with these new schemes as they become live. Obviously, we don't know exactly how it's going to be rolled out, but you've got to be ready to move quickly. So be prepared for that, definitely, because they are compulsory, and failing to do so has knock-on effects in respect of notices that can be served, and also creates separate regulatory breach for which those lovely fines that you mentioned can be imposed by local authority, largely, unilaterally based on that local authority enforcement element to it. So the fines are higher, as you say. It was previously 5,000 under the Reform Act, the Reform Bill. It's gone up to 7 in this current bill, and repeated offences or serious breaches will be up to 40,000. So they are quite punitive.
Yes, it's not just a case of being thrown off of the database, it's quite punitive. And also, is there kind of more scope for landlords to fall through the gaps and into illegality almost accidentally? Because I know there are quite a few criminal offences that are being created for this act.
The bill creates, specific, for the first time, specific landlord duties, and a breach of many of those duties is actually an offence. So yes, and some of those breaches are relatively benign, you might say, for a small portfolio landlord that doesn't have an agent assisting them. They may be still living in blissful ignorance even when the act comes into force. I know plenty of landlords that still don't know that a Section 21 notice is on a specific prescribed form, and they'll try and send a letter or something. Relatively rare, but they still exist. So that situation, when the bill comes into force, will actually create an offence. So if you purport to end the tenancy by notice to quit, that's a breach, and doing it orally, that's probably rarer. But it's things like this nature, then they're not huge criminal offences, in the sense of the perception of landlords. But if you take a step off the correct line, you could find yourself liable for serious fines and potentially prosecution, which I think is quite draconian. It's quite a big issue. I think that firstly, I don't think is not getting a great deal of coverage, maybe, but secondly, is very, very important for both landlords and agents to be aware of what these duties are and make sure their landlords are aware of what these duties are, so that they can keep on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind as well is that, the National Audit Office, the last time it did kind of a look into the condition of housing in the country, found that I think it was almost a quarter of private rented housing had at least one serious hazard in it. So I don't know, Jemma, do you think this is just a headache too many for landlords, or do you think in some ways it's quite necessary?
I think in some ways it probably is quite necessary to improve standards, and also even sometimes we have landlords that don't really want to do works, and for us as an agent, it's actually going to give us some weight now to say, look, you can't delay on doing this anymore. You've got to do this, or else you can face significant fines. So it will help us in that way. I think on the whole, most of our stock's in pretty good condition, but I think in turn it will actually help us to expedite work sometimes that some landlords may, for whatever reason, be dragging their heels on. But the landlord database, I think, is a good idea and long overdue, because people will be able to look and see that their property is safe. All the electric's safe, and gas is regularly being checked. I mean, obviously we don't know the full detail of what's going to be part of that landlord database, but it'd be interesting to know. But I think, as Sam said, you need to be ready for it. And one benefit of having a managing agent, for all the compliance documents, we'll have that easily on file. It will just be another admin task. But if you're a private landlord, it'll be looking for all this information. So, in turn, I imagine an agent will probably do this on behalf of a landlord, obviously in their name, and apply for it. And that's going to be the benefit of an agent, because, every year a gas safety certificate or an EICR is going to be need re-uploading all the time. So it's going to be an ongoing, more admin burden to report to a separate authority for the private landlords. So in turn, I think this is where the key benefits of having a proper professional agent will come in.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a delicate question preparing you, but obviously this is a lot of extra work for letting agents as well. So I assume that costs are going to go up for landlords to kind of compensate for some of this. Are we going to start seeing that across the letting agency sector, do you think?
I've seen there is potential people could charge a standalone fee for applying for the landlord's portal and maintaining it, or if you have to go to court and prepare all the paperwork for the first tier tribunal, because we're going to have to provide evidence that we check the market rate, to support the claims. That is an absolute, it's going to be a lot more work. Really interesting to see the volume of how much it actually earns. But yeah, I do think the agents, quite rightfully so, could charge more as standalone things, or maybe look to charge a management fee, because there is obviously the world for lettings is changing dramatically.
Yeah, but I suppose the flip side
may not be very positive for the response for our clients, but there is going to be a lot more work, and I don't think people actually increase their management fees that often. If I'm honest, our management fees are stuck for a long time.
It's a moot point, isn't it, as to all these aspects of the bill which are going to drive up costs. If agents doing more work, they should rightfully charge more for it. Therefore, the landlord's being charged more for it. But who does that ultimately, where does that end up? And it's potentially, of course, going to be rents going up. And so, in fact, the tenant foots the bill when that was the exact opposite, intention of this bill coming in.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of advice, if you could just go around, maybe start with you, Dominic, and just what kind of advice, if you had one piece of advice to give to perhaps a letting agent rather than a landlord, as you're not on the ground anymore?
I think it's all about, it's all these things, isn't it? It's all education, really. That's the core thing for any letting agent, is to make sure they're speaking to their clients, their landlords, their tenants. And, it is a big change. I think there's lots of fear around change. People don't like it. I think there's another side where there will be a healthy private rental sector set up a bit smaller. So I think it's alleviating those anxieties with your clients, showing them your expertise to be able to manage them through that change. I suppose getting the message out there of what you offer to the 50% of the market that don't have that support. So, where are they getting the information from? And perhaps that's the opportunity, is to show your professionalism to people that at the moment don't buy into it.
Yeah, this is the flip side of fees possibly going up, is that, of course, you might be able to get some more business because people are going to feel as though they need a bit more hand-holding in this kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's so much more admin that's been added over the years, sending a tenant a copy of the gas safety within 28 days of it being carried out. Lots more things like, the how to rent guides that come out regularly, having to resend them. All those things never used to exist.
Yeah.
And a lot of when we find that, like, only landlords that come to us that may have only just done a tenant find, and then when they go to serve notice and you tell them, well, have you done X, Y, and Z? They're like, no. And it's tricky.
It's down to things like even having fireproof sofas, isn't it? If they haven't got agents attached, then people don't necessarily see the need to do those steps. So it should lead to hopefully some better standards out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of all this is trying to drive professionalism up in the industry, which is only going to be a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether, Jemma, you could give us some advice for tenants, possibly?
Tenants, I think, read the Renters' Rights Bill. If you're reading this, have a good Google on it and read, how it's going to affect you. I think in the main, it's going to be really positive for tenants. And if you're waiting to get that pet, happy days, because it's going to be a lot more enjoyable for you if you're waiting to have that. But also, if you're renting at the minute, phone your managing agent. We want to talk to you. We want to make this as seamless as possible for everyone. And as an agent, when the bill comes in, we will be communicating with all our current tenants at the minute, saying this is coming into this effect, just to let them know. So that you don't want anyone to have like a nasty surprise one day, just for saying something they're just not expecting. But I think it will be greatly received on the whole by tenants. But yeah, communicating with our tenants, like, call us if you've got any queries or issues or anything. But I think it'll be great for them, because I've said before, they won't feel penalised if they need to leave their tenancy early for any reason.
Yeah. And Sam, I'm going to give you landlords. What advice would you give to landlords to make sure they're not falling foul of the law?
Get an agent. A good one, obviously. again, it's similar theme running through this: education, becoming familiar with it, read the guidance. So the government will release guidance. Obviously, there's guidance out there now, but it's a little bit work in progress. So yeah, get familiar with the guidance, get familiar with what your obligations are, and make decisions as early as possible about what suits your portfolio or one property or whatever it might be, as to how you might need to make decisions about how things are going to change, when it comes into force. So, because there's things you might need to do quickly if you want to do anything about them at all.
I mean, one of the things I think to end on is that, there are strong campaigns on both sides. There are strong landlord voices and there are strong kind of tenant voices now as well in the past few years that have grown. So I do think there's perhaps been some sensationalism around it. What's kind of the biggest myth that you hear or misunderstanding about the Renters' Rights Bill that you would like to clear up? And I think that could be aimed at anyone really, letting agents, landlords, or tenants.
I think it's. I think landlords have a bit of a bashing that's not fair, really. I mean, we said earlier, yes, there is an element, there's a minority that create the sensationalism, but a vast majority are people. When this all started, buy-to-let, over the history, there's been this balance between landlord and tenant, and it's moved over the decades. And in the 1990s, this was promoted as a way for someone to have a pension later in life. That it was an investment because pensions weren't what they were, and the government were right behind it. And so those people the vast majority of them hold the private rental sector in their hands, and they are just hoping to have a nice income in their retirement and have a good relationship with tenants. So I think perhaps that sensationalism has damaged the image of many landlords who are decent people.
Okay, yeah, and Jemma, what would you say?
I think don't be concerned that Section 21 is going to be abolished, because you will still be able to recover your property. Don't panic.
Yeah, that's a good one too. And yep, Sam, what do you think?
I would say it doesn't abolish no-fault evictions, or that's how it's been expressed, but ending a tenancy on a no-fault basis. It's just simply expanded the Section 8 elements and narrowed those specific non-fault situations. So it's not an absolute end of the road for landlords. So perhaps they don't need to be quite so panicking about what's going to happen as perhaps some are.
Yeah, and also just kind of your outlook for the market, I guess, would be really good. What are where do you think it's going in terms of yields?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment it's under a lot of pressure. As I said, it's this is one element. The bigger problem perhaps has been removal of interest rate relief on mortgages, which sort of particularly in London buried halved yields, and then without capital growth, because there hasn't been London, perhaps affordability ceilings being reached. You're seeing a very weak case for a landlord. Ultimately, I think that's going to be an availability problem, and perhaps a problem for the sort of joy of living in cities and the vibrancy of cities and the economics of a city. But rents ultimately have to track wage inflation. So I think you'll see that as always the long-term trend, and I think that will continue.
Yeah. And are you feeling positive about what's happening in Greenwich and Blackheath?
I think once the bills come in, things will settle, and it will become business as normal. This is our new normal, and personally, I just want the bill to come in so we can get on with it, right? So we can tell people absolutely what will be happening and when it's going to happen, to give everyone surety and confidence to move forward with the initiative.
The uncertainty is the killer, isn't it?
Uncertainty, and it's just like people call up and they're like, "Well, we don't know exactly when it's going to come in yet, but I just want it to come in, so let's get on with it." It's the biggest change since the AST was brought in, so let's just embrace it. I think most of it will be positive and be streamlined and make it more professional.
Yeah, and how are you feeling about how the legal profession is going to deal with it?
Well,
you'll be very busy.
Yeah. Or perhaps less busy if less Section 21 notices going out. It's a period of change. There's always change. It's always been a gradual, possibly accelerating change in the landlord and tenant legal sphere for some time. It's going to be a huge change to mindset and procedures and processes. But I'm sure this time next year we'll wonder what all the fuss was about, and it'll just be the brave new world. who knows?
I do think as well, landlords, if they are concerned about things, and obviously now the Section 8 notice period for unpaid rent has been increased to 3 months. If you need a buffer for your rental income, get rent insurance. That would be an absolute recommendation. Some very reasonably priced policies out there now, which you can get independently or via your agent. It really does. Most of them cover up to £100,000 for legal expenses. Some of them cover up to 15 months of unpaid rent, which should, with the current thing, that will give you enough time to get it through the courts, and hopefully going forward, it will just give you that peace of mind in the background if anything goes wrong, and it won't cost you thousands.
Yeah.
Great, and I think we've covered a lot of ground, and it's been a very kind of calm, sensible conversation, which I think is perhaps something that needed to be had around this as well. I'm feeling good about it. So thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully people have found it really helpful too. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.